town forced obese orphan girl to marry violent mountain man to get rid of her. But take her, Silas. She's yours now. God help you if you can stomach that fat burden. The crowd in Redemption Springs roared with cruel laughter. Inside the small wooden church, 19-year-old Esther May stood trembling before the altar, her hands chained in front of her like a prisoner. Her cheeks were flushed crimson, her brown hair clinging to her tear-streaked face. She wasn't being married. She was being banished. After her parents died of fever, the town council had grown tired of feeding the orphan girl who lived in the church cellar. "She eats more than she prays," one woman had sneered. Now they had found a way to rid themselves of her forever. They'd forced her into marriage with Silas Blackwood, the mountain man everyone whispered about, the one who, they said, had murdered his wife and buried her somewhere in the pines. The preacher's voice trembled as he read the vows. No one cared whether Esther said yes. They only wanted the spectacle. When she hesitated, someone from the pews shouted, "Do it, girl! Ain't no man ever gonna take you again." The laughter echoed like gunfire. At the back of the church, the heavy doors creaked open. Snow blew in, followed by a towering figure wrapped in a dark wool coat. Silas Blackwood stepped inside, his boots thudding against the floor. The crowd fell silent. His beard was thick, his eyes the color of storm clouds, cold, unreadable. He walked straight to the altar, handed the sheriff a folded document, and said quietly, "It's done." Then he looked at Esther. "Get your things. You're coming with me." No one breathed. The girl everyone mocked was leaving the town that never wanted her on the arm of the man everyone feared. Where are you listening from, folks? Let me know in the comments below. The snow was falling thick over Redemption Springs that morning, the kind that muffled every sound and made the world feel distant and cruel. The townspeople had gathered in front of the church, pretending to watch a wedding, though everyone knew it was a punishment. Esther May Thornton stood near the steps, her threadbare shawl soaked through, her fingers trembling around the wilted flowers they'd shoved into her hands. She had been the orphan girl for as long as anyone could remember, round-faced, soft-bodied, always quiet, always working. She scrubbed the church floors, mended torn hymnals, and cooked for the preacher who pretended not to notice when people mocked her after Sunday service. She wasn't beautiful by the town standards. Her cheeks were too full, her arms too soft, her dresses always too tight around the middle. The girls called her Piggy May. The men looked away. No one saw the kindness in her brown eyes or the way she prayed for everyone, even those who ridiculed her. When the town's matriarch, Cordelia Whitmore, announced that Redemption Springs could no longer afford to keep the useless, everyone knew who she meant. Cordelia's son owned the local mine, and she wanted Silas Blackwood's land, rich in iron and untouched by claim. So she concocted a plan that sounded merciful: find the orphan girl a husband. Rumors about Silas had spread like wildfire for years. Some said he'd strangled his wife in a fit of rage. Others swore he talked to wolves and buried strangers in his field. No one had seen him in town for months, but when Cordelia sent word that there was a woman willing to serve and obey, Silas agreed, on one condition: the girl must come willingly, and no one from the town would ever bother him again. That morning, when Silas arrived, Esther caught her first real glimpse of him. He was enormous, his shoulders broad beneath a worn coat, his face shadowed by a dark beard streaked with silver. His hands, looked like they could crush stone, yet his movements were measured, almost careful. His voice, low and steady, rolled through the room like thunder muffled by snow. When the preacher asked for the vows, Esther's voice barely rose above a whisper. She wanted to say no, to scream that she didn't deserve this. But the sight of Cordelia's smirk froze the words in her throat. No one would help her. No one ever had. After the brief, mocking ceremony, Silas turned to her and said simply, "Come." He took her bundle of clothes, loaded it onto his wagon, and climbed into the driver's seat without another word. As they rolled out of town, the laughter followed them down the hill. Esther sat silently, clutching her coat, watching Redemption Springs fade into the storm, her prison finally behind her, though she didn't yet know if she was riding toward freedom or another kind of cage. Beside her, Silas held the reins loosely, his jaw set, eyes fixed on the mountains ahead. The silence between them was heavy, but not cruel, just unreadable. And for the first time in her life, Esther realized something strange. She wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. She was afraid of what would happen if this man was kind. The wagon creaked through the white wilderness, its wooden wheels grinding against frozen earth. The storm thickened as the mountains swallowed the last traces of Redemption Springs. Esther sat rigid beside Silas Blackwood, clutching her shawl tighter, afraid to speak. Every sound, the crack of the reins, the snort of the horse, the wind howling through pine, felt deafening in the silence between them. She expected him to shout, to demand, to punish her for being the burden everyone said she was. But Silas didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the road, his jaw unmoving, snow gathering in his beard. Occasionally he'd glance her way, not with anger, but as if making sure she was still there, still breathing. After several hours, her teeth chattered so hard she could barely hold them together. He finally said, "Put this on." He lifted an old fur coat from behind the seat and handed it to her. The coat was enormous, heavy with the scent of smoke and pine, but warm, so warm it made her chest ache. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave no reply, only nodded once. They rode on through the storm until the sun dipped low behind the ridges. The mountains loomed black and white and endless. At last, Silas pulled the reins and stopped beside a frozen creek. "We'll rest here," he said. Esther watched as he unhitched the horses and built a small fire with practiced movements. His hands were steady, his motions sure. He laid down a pot, melted snow, added a handful of dried beans and jerky. The smell of warm food filled the air, and her stomach growled involuntarily. He glanced up. "Eat." I can wait," she murmured. He looked at her for the first time that day, really looked. "You've been waiting your whole life. Eat." The tone wasn't harsh. It was something else, a command born not from cruelty but care. She obeyed, her fingers trembling as she held the tin cup of soup. When she finished, he handed her a folded blanket. "Sleep in the wagon. I'll take first watch." Esther hesitated. "You'll stay outside? In the cold?" He shrugged. "The cold's kinder than most men I've known." She climbed into the wagon, pulling the blanket to her chin. Through the small gap in the canvas, she could see him sitting by the fire, motionless, a dark silhouette against the snow. The flames flickered across his face, revealing deep lines of grief, not anger. Hours passed before she drifted to sleep. She dreamed of laughter, of Cordelia's smirk, of mocking voices. But when she woke, The first thing she saw was Silas draping his own coat over her shoulders. He didn't notice she was awake. He simply adjusted the blanket, careful not to touch her, then returned to the fire. The next day, they continued higher into the mountains. The air grew sharper, the trees denser, the light softer through the frost. Esther began to sense something strange in the silence between them. Not fear, but safety. A kind of peace she'd never known in Redemption Springs. When she asked where they were headed, he said, "My land's at the base of the northern ridge. Closest neighbors are a mile off. You'll be safe there." The word safe caught in her throat. By the time the cabin came into view, a small log house nestled beside a frozen pond, the sun was sinking again, bleeding red across the snow. Silas climbed down, offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was rough and warm, his grip steady but gentle. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Home. No one had ever said that word to her before. The cabin stood like a sentinel against the wilderness, logs darkened by time, smoke curling from a stone chimney, the faint scent of pine sap and wood fire in the air. To Esther, it looked less like a home and more like a dream, pulled from frost and silence. Silas pushed open the heavy door. Inside, the warmth hit her like an embrace. The glow from the hearth danced across the wooden walls, casting soft shadows over the simple furnishings. A table built by hand, a shelf of books, a pair of carved wooden chairs, a worn quilt draped over a small bed near the corner. "You'll sleep there," he said, nodding toward the bed. "I'll take the floor." Esther blinked. I can sleep near the fire. You don't have to." "I said I'll take the floor." His voice was firm, but not unkind. That night, she lay beneath the quilt, listening to the crackle of burning logs. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside it was calm, peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt safe enough to close her eyes without fear. Days began to fall into rhythm. Silas rose before dawn to chop wood and tend to traps, his movements quiet but steady. He worked like a man who belonged to the land, each swing of the axe deliberate, each breath timed with the mountain itself. Esther, unsure what to do at first, started cleaning, mending, and cooking small meals from the limited supplies. One morning, she noticed the way he watched her roll dough near the hearth. "You bake," he said simply. "Not well," she admitted, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "But I like it. My mother used to say that bread makes a house smell like love." A faint smile touched his lips. "Haven't smelled that in a long time." Encouraged, she began baking every few days, bread, pies, even small honey cakes, when he managed to bring wild honey back from the woods. The scent filled the cabin, mingling with pine smoke and leather. Silas never said much, but he always ate quietly, savoring every bite as if it meant more than he could explain. He taught her small things, too, how to split kindling safely, how to tell which tracks in the snow were rabbit or fox, how to keep the fire breathing through the long nights. Once, when she cut her palm on the edge of an axe handle, he took her hand without a word, cleaned the wound with snowmelt, and wrapped it gently with a strip torn from his own shirt. His fingers were warm and careful, his touch almost reverent. "You don't have to," she began. He interrupted softly. "You're under my roof. That means you're under my care." Something shifted in her that day. The fear that had followed her since the church began to fade, replaced by something she didn't quite understand. Trust, perhaps, or gratitude so deep it frightened her. One evening, when the snow outside glowed blue beneath the moonlight, Silas came in, carrying a small wooden carving. It was a sparrow, delicate and smooth. "For you?" he said awkwardly, placing it on the table. "I saw one on the ridge this morning. Reminded me of you." She frowned, puzzled. "A sparrow? I think most people would say I'm more like a goose." He met her gaze, steady and quiet. "No, sparrows survive winters, others can't." The words struck her like warmth in her chest. She didn't know how to respond, so she only smiled and whispered, "Thank you." As the weeks passed, laughter began to creep into their home, small, hesitant at first, then real. Esther started humming while she baked, and sometimes Silas would stop chopping wood to listen. When a storm broke one night and lightning cracked across the ridge, she found herself clutching his arm without thinking. He didn't move away. They spent those long winter evenings reading aloud by the fire, her voice trembling through stories she'd once read to herself in the church cellar, his deep tone answering hers in slow, careful rhythm. One night, she caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, soft, uncertain, almost afraid. "What?" she asked, her cheeks burning. He looked away. "Nothing. Just hard to remember what peace feels like." And in that moment, Esther realized that maybe he wasn't the monster the town had feared. Maybe, just like her, he was someone the world had misunderstood, someone simply trying to find his way back to warmth. Outside, the wind howled again. Inside, two souls, broken, bruised, but healing, sat by the fire, bound by silence that no longer felt empty. Spring came slowly to the mountain. The snow melted into silver streams, and the air smelled of pine and damp earth. Esther could hear birds again, real birds, not the lonely wind's imitation of them. The cabin felt alive now, bread cooling on the table, the sound of Silas sharpening his axe, a small garden of cabbages sprouting by the fence. But peace, like the mountain thaw, never lasted long. One morning, Silas returned from the ridge later than usual. His jaw was tight, his coat dusted with fresh mud. "Riders," he muttered, setting his rifle near the door. "Two men heading toward the trail, from town." Esther froze. "From Redemption Springs?" He nodded once. Didn't stop to talk, but they were watching. She tried to brush it off, but a shadow crept back into her chest. The town had banished her. Surely they had no reason to climb all the way here. Yet something told her Cordelia Whitmore wasn't done with them. That night, unable to sleep, Esther lit a candle and went through the old chest at the foot of her bed. Inside, beneath folded quilts and a stack of yellowed letters, she found something she hadn't seen before, an envelope addressed in delicate handwriting. "To my beloved Silas, if you ever need to remember the truth." Curiosity trembled through her fingers as she opened it. Inside were several letters written by Silas's late wife. The words were tender, filled with love, describing long evenings by the fire and her gratitude for his care as illness consumed her lungs. "You have been the gentlest man I've ever known," one letter read. "If they ever say otherwise, let them choke on their lies." Tears blurred Esther's vision. She had never doubted his kindness, but seeing proof of it carved into another woman's final words broke her heart open. She tucked the letters carefully away, unsure whether to tell him she'd found them. The next morning, Silas caught her reading near the chest. "Those are hers," he said quietly. "Did you open them?" Her lips parted, guilt flooding her cheeks. I I didn't mean to pry. He held up a hand. It's all right. He sat down beside her, staring into the fire. People said I killed her, that I went mad when she died. I never corrected them. Easier that way. Towns need monsters to feel good about themselves. His voice broke, raw and low. She was sick for months. I buried her myself, up near the ridge. After that, they stopped coming. Maybe they thought grief was catching. Esther reached out, resting her hand over his. You're not the monster they say you are. He didn't pull away. And you're not the burden they said you were. But before she could answer, the distant sound of hooves echoed through the valley. They rose together. Silas stepped to the window, eyes narrowing. 3 riders. One wore a sheriff's badge that glinted in the sunlight. Behind him, Cordelia Whitmore sat in a black carriage, her chin lifted in triumph. Stay inside, Silas said. No, Esther whispered. They came for me. I have to face them. He turned, his gaze hard as steel. If they lay a hand on you, I'll end this mountain in blood. As the riders approached, Esther felt her pulse pounding in her ears. The peace they had built, bread, laughter, warmth, hung fragile as glass. Cordelia dismounted first, her fur coat sweeping the mud. Silas Blackwood, she called, her voice sharp as frost. By order of the county, I'm here to retrieve this girl. You've kept her here against her will. You'll answer for it. Silas stepped forward, the rifle slung low in his arm. She's here because she wants to be. Cordelia smirked. That's not what the papers say. She lifted a folded document. According to the law, your marriage was coerced, and her presence here is her choice, Esther interrupted, stepping out from the doorway. Cordelia's smile faltered, but her eyes glinted with malice. Oh, my dear, you really think anyone will believe you? The air between them trembled like the moment before a storm. The wind howled down from the ridge as if the mountain itself were listening. Esther stood in the doorway of the cabin, the hem of her dress fluttering against the threshold. Behind her, the firelight glowed, a fragile warmth against the cold sneer of Cordelia Whitmore. Step aside, girl, Cordelia ordered. You've been deceived by a murderer. Redemption Springs will not harbor a scandal of this kind. Silas moved to stand between them, his frame filling the doorway. You'll leave, he said evenly. You and your men. This land isn't yours. Cordelia raised a gloved hand, and the sheriff beside her tightened his grip on his revolver. You think your word means anything, Blackwood? You've been a ghost for years. The law remembers what you did to your wife. Silas's eyes darkened. Then maybe the law should read. From behind him, Esther stepped forward, clutching the bundle of letters she'd found the night before. Her voice quavered, but her chin was high. These are from his wife, she said, holding them out, written before she died. She wrote that he was kind, that he took care of her until her last breath. Cordelia's smirk faltered. You expect us to believe? There's more, Silas cut in, tossing a folder onto the step. Deeds, court seals. Every acre of this mountain is mine. Your son tried to forge my claim 6 months ago. I sent the proof to the county office in Helena. They'll be arriving here tomorrow with an arrest warrant. For the first time, Cordelia's poise cracked. Her eyes darted toward the sheriff. He hesitated, then lowered his gun. Ma'am, he muttered, if he's telling the truth— Silence! Cordelia snapped, but her voice had lost its edge. Esther stepped closer. You wanted to throw me away, to make me disappear. But I found something here you'll never understand. Kindness and a home. Cordelia glared at her, trembling with fury. "You ungrateful little—" "Enough," Silas growled, his voice a low thunder that made even the horses flinch. "You'll leave this mountain, Mrs. Whitmore, and if you ever send another man here, I'll deliver the proof myself to the state marshal." For a moment, silence hung heavy as snowfall. Then Cordelia turned sharply, skirts sweeping the mud. "We'll see who the law favors, Blackwood." She mounted her carriage, the sheriff following behind. The sound of hooves faded into the distance until only the wind remained. Esther stood still, her hands shaking, letters pressed to her chest. Silas reached for her gently, his rough palm resting over hers. "It's over," he said quietly. She looked up at him, eyes glistening. "No, it's just beginning." For the first time he smiled, a small, weary smile that melted the last of winter from her heart. The storm passed 2 days later, leaving the valley washed in gold. Snow still crowned the peaks, but the air carried the faint scent of spring, wet earth, pine needles, and smoke from the hearth. Esther stood on the porch, watching the sun rise over the ridge. The world looked new, as if the mountain itself had taken her side. Behind her, the cabin glowed with quiet life, bread baking in the oven, the fire crackling softly, and Silas humming under his breath as he repaired a fishing net by the window. When she turned, he looked up. Their eyes met across the small room, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I never thanked you," she said softly, "for standing by me when no one else would." He shook his head. "You don't owe me thanks. You're the one who stood up to them. You're the brave one, Esther." She stepped closer, her hands trembling just slightly. "I used to think love was something meant for other people. People prettier, smaller, easier to carry." She smiled through her tears. "But maybe love isn't about being carried. Maybe it's about finding someone who walks beside you." Silas reached out, brushing a loose curl from her face. "Then walk with me," he murmured, "for as long as the mountain stands." She nodded, unable to speak, and leaned into his touch. That evening, as twilight settled and the first stars shimmered over the ridge, the cabin filled with laughter again, low, warm, and real. Esther, the girl the town had thrown away, had found not just safety, but belonging. And on that quiet mountain, 2 lost souls, one feared, one forgotten, finally built the life both had been denied. Every time I tell a story like this, I'm reminded that kindness can grow in the harshest places, sometimes even on a mountain where no one thought love could survive. If you've ever felt unwanted, unseen, or unloved, remember Esther's story. You're not defined by what the world says you are, but by the love you choose to give and accept. Wherever you're listening from, Texas, Berlin, Manila, or Hanoi, thank you for sharing this moment. If you still believe that love can change even the coldest hearts, stay with me. The next story will be for you.